Welcome to the Pursuing Freedom Outdoors podcast, a place where backcountry warriors can share their stories of grit, service, healing, and wilderness adventures. I'm your host, Tom Walton, Marine Corps veteran, full-time cop, and aspiring hunting and fishing guide. Join me and others as we journey from the hood to the woods in pursuit of freedom in the outdoors. All right, everybody. Welcome to the Pursuing Freedom Outdoors podcast yet again. Excited to have on my guest today, Dalton Gray from Fairbanks, Alaska. The reason I'm excited about having Dalton on is because he hosts his own really awesome show, the Great Alaska Hunting Podcast. I've been listening to that for about a year, which is about how long they've had the show on. Knew pretty quickly that he and his brother-in-law, Mo, who he co-hosts with, were going to be awesome dudes and make an awesome show, and they've continued to do that. Dalton grew up kind of interesting because he lives in Alaska now and has been there for a long time, but he grew up most of his childhood in Fiji, which is pretty interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. And before returning to Fairbanks as a teenager, and since then been getting into bear hunting and hunting a lot with his father-in-law or and his brother-in-law. So it sounds like you got a lot going on, Dalton. A brown bear hunting guide, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you having.
Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Looking forward to learning about you.
About my background, like you said, my parents were missionaries in the Fiji Islands when I was a kid. They moved there when I was about 2 years old, and we lived there the majority of my childhood until my middle teen years, and we moved back to Fairbanks permanently. I was originally born in Fairbanks, and my dad grew up here. His dad lived and grew up in Southern California until the mid to late 70s when they moved up here. And so my family's been in Fairbanks for a couple generations now. So anyway, we've been back to visit Fairbanks, to see family over the years of being in Fiji. I think we moved back about 2014 permanently. So we had been back in the States off and on to visit family and go visit some supporting churches that supported us over there over the years. So we spent the better part of 14 years or so in Fiji, if you don't include the travel back and forth and the visiting time to come back home. And my grandpa owned one of the largest archery shops on the West Coast in the 60s and early 70s. And so that there was a big bow hunting background in our family. I grew up, obviously, in Fiji, you can't have guns unless you have special permitting, which we did not have. So we grew up shooting bows, recurves and longbows. And so that meant that in a country that's, number one, it's a third world country with no game laws, and a kid with a bow and arrow, you pretty much shoot anything that can move, up to and including stray dogs that would bite people just for fun. So that was kind of the beginning of that interest in hunting, was growing up shooting a bow. And every time we would come back to the States, we'd try to go hunting here and there. As a kid, it was just little things like grouse hunting or going out fishing. And just being outside in Alaska was always something that I looked forward to being able to do when we came back. So when we moved back permanently as a teenager, I remember very clearly when I drew a youth permit for an antlerless moose tag right around Fairbanks area here, and my dad and I went out, and that was my first big game animal. Yep. So shot the moose, and then at the end of the following winter, I bought my first pickup truck. And of course, for any teenager that's into hunting, that was my doorway to trouble. My brother-in-law, well, he's now my brother-in-law. He and I were buddies as teenagers, and we started bear baiting together. Now, he had grown up bear baiting with his dad, and he wanted to do it himself at this point, and he wanted a partner to go with him. So I ended up going out bear baiting with him, and at the end of that spring, he shot his first black bear with a bow. He had killed one with a rifle prior, but he shot his first archery black bear over our bait. And that was at the very end of the season in the spring, which is the end of June. And the following morning, we were at his dad's garage. We had hauled that bear out whole, just gutted it, put it on the four-wheeler, and driven home. And I think I actually slept on his couch in the basement that night at his parents' house. And next morning we got up, we were skinning that black bear in the garage. And his dad had multiple baits out in a different area further out of town, and he was going out to check his baits and then spend the weekend and hunt and then clean up and be done because the season was over after that weekend. So he said, well, if you got all your stuff, you can go with me for the next couple of days. And if you get a crack at a bear, then you're welcome to shoot one off one of my baits. So that resulted in that night, 24 hours later, I shot my first black bear with my recurve. And then 3 hours after that, at the same bait, my father-in-law shot another black bear. So my first 24 successful bear killing ended up with 3 dead black bears. So I got kind of a crash course in bear skinning and hide care and meat salvaging and all that goes along with it. So that just really kickstarted my addiction. And I was that would have been 2016, so right at 10 years ago now, as of this year. So that just immediately became all I wanted to do every spring. And every spring since then, I've bear baited in some fashion or another. And obviously, you learn some things as you go along the way, and try different areas, and you perfect some tactics. And you're always, at least I always, find myself tinkering with baiting and trying different things. I love to experiment, and whether that's with the baiting itself and different things or different scent lures that I like to use. If it's not that, then it's weaponry. I said that I shot my first black bear with a recurve. Shortly after that, I really hurt one of my shoulders pretty bad in a hockey accident, and so I didn't shoot a bow for a couple of years, and so that resulted in me shooting a bunch of bears with a rifle over bait. And then since then, the last good many years now, I've gotten back into shooting the bow, but I bought a compound, which I had never shot a compound before until about maybe 2020 or 2021, and so now I've killed. I think every bear that I've shot since 2020, with the exception of 2, at least over bait, has been with a compound. At least all of my personal biggest bears have been shot with a bow, and most of them with a compound now. So it's fun to try different things and experiment with different arrows and broadheads and shot placement, tinkering and experimenting. Ended up, kind of the craziest part about archery hunting over bait is, at least in my storybook so far, is I ended up shooting my biggest black bear in the forehead with my bow. That happened 2 springs ago. It was an odd situation. It was a big black bear. He was jostling back and forth with position with a grizzly bear in order to get the prime feed time. And my wife was in the stand with me that night. It was late. I think it was about midnight or 1 a.m., something like that, typical prime time. And the sun doesn't go down late June. So the black bear came in and he was laying down, quartering away. I shot him, intentionally aiming for the offside leg that was kind of tucked back. I'm sure you're familiar with bears' lungs sitting further back than most deer species. And so I was curious if I could take that shot and get both lungs and break the offside leg, just out of curiosity. And it ended up working. I did end up hitting the offside leg, and it split that bone that goes from the shoulder down to the elbow. It hit the middle, and then he rolled. And every black bear I've ever been a part of killing or have killed myself, I've never shot a bear or seen one shot that didn't just run away. I've never seen one get shot and then stand up and then come back towards where you are with the intention to throw hands. So this one, he spun around and he rolled over behind the bait, and then he came back over. Yeah, I could see his leg was broken, but just situationally with how close to the bait that stand was, I was shooting out of a picnic chair. I couldn't get my bow any lower at an angle, and I already had another arrow knocked and drawn back because, if you get another shot, you take it. And he faced up and his ears went back and he let out a loud and looked right at me. And I thought, well, I was going to shoot you in the top of the shoulders just because that's what I have. But so I just moved the pin down to right between his eyes and let the arrow go. And it worked. It worked. I found that broadhead about 3 vertebrae deep, right in the spinal column. And he went down like a bad habit. I mean, he was dead before his chin clacked off the dirt. It was instant death. But, that's to be expected. But yeah. So there's all kinds of interesting things that you get to tinker with bear baiting and learning about bear behavior and getting time just observing. I would say probably 80% of the bears that we see, if not more, don't ever even get shot because they're immature, or they're sows with cubs, or they're sows in general, and we know there's something better, and so we're holding out and waiting for a better bear. So we generally try to shoot something that is of mature adult size, although a few have been known to slip through the cracks with the excuse of we want meat.
Sure.
Yeah, so that kind of started the bear hunting addiction, was baiting. And then a few years into that, I have another buddy of mine that lives about 300 miles south of here, and he and I had done a bunch of hunting together, mainly deer hunting in the southeastern part of the state, where we would go down there annually to go hunt Sitka blacktails. And he and I had talked about guiding quite a bit, and he had grown up in the state and always wanted to be a guide. I had always wanted to be as involved in hunting in Alaska as I can. Even as a child, I always wanted to do as much as I could outdoors. And when we moved back here, and I kind of realized that guiding was a good way to spend a lot of time outdoors, and obviously not totally appreciating what all went into being a guide at the time, I said I'd like to guide too. So he found a job with an outfitter. He was working as a landscaper at the time, and he was cutting the grass at this house for some guy. And the guy asked him, "Hey, but would you ever be interested in being a packer at an outfit?" And my buddy said, "Well, absolutely." And so he called me up and said, "Hey, this guy owns a bear hunting operation, and he wants to hire a couple of packers to train to be guides." And he said, "Are you in?" And I said, "Are you kidding me?" I hope he gave him my number. So that was about as long of an interview process as we needed. So we immediately went to work that following spring, and spent 2 months down in that part of the state, down in the Central Gulf, guiding, well, packing, which you're a glorified baggage carrier, but you learn. And we both got put with senior experienced guides in that camp, and that camp is very unique in the concentration of veterans that have been there for a very long time. It's not just 10-year guys. I mean, we're talking about, I think the shortest tenured guide above my buddy and I now is, I think this is his 30th spring that he'll be there.
Wow.
So he's been guiding for 2 years more than I've even been alive. So anyway, that right there was an immediate head start for us being able to work under very experienced, very competent, very familiar with the area fellas that were masters of the craft, really. And so that ended up being an annual occurrence, and my buddy and I have been back there every year since, and I'll be back there again this year. So that's been the mainstay of my guiding on a yearly basis. I have guided for a handful of different operations in the fall time, and I have enjoyed that. I've learned a lot, doing sheep hunts, caribou hunts, and a couple of moose hunts as well. But for the most part, I work a 9-to-5 job. I've been working for the same place doing residential and some commercial here and there, but mostly residential air exchange systems. And people would refer to it as HVAC, really. So that's my trade, and that's something that I do prioritize. I could be going a lot more through the year and guide a lot more, but I'm happily married and I want to stay that way. So I think there's a balance to anything. The spring guiding has been a good opportunity, and that works well with my work schedule. It's always a repeatable thing that I can be gone for that amount of time in the spring, and that doesn't really bring anything to a screeching halt at work, and that allows me to be home a lot more through the summer and fall. So that's kind of been how I got into it. And brown bear guiding, if I could only hunt one animal for the rest of my life, it would be coastal brown bears. That's number one, top of the list. I love no other animal more than coastal brown bears. So that's kind of my background and kind of a 1,000-foot skittering view to where we are now.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. And I hear you on the guiding thing too. I've done a little bit of guiding here for bear, deer. I do a lot of, I've done some fishing guide trips. I'm going to be doing a little guiding, fishing and stuff, but I haven't broke the barrier yet as far as like leaving my really stable career that I've been in for 14 years in law enforcement. It's just, it pays the bills and keeps life comfortable. And the same thing, right? Like I'm happily married for 16 years. Don't want to screw that up either.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's, there is opportunity out there, but you do have to be gone. There's a lot of sacrifice. And I have people that ask me all the time about getting into guiding and being a hunting guide. There's a fella in my men's group at church whose son is about to graduate college here in Idaho with a forestry degree, and he wants to
Mm.
get out and get into outfitting. And he picks my brain a lot. And I just tell him like, well, young guy, if you're and he's got a pretty solid girlfriend with him that I'm sure they're going to end up getting married. And, but she seems, according to them, she seems like she's kind of down for the cause and understanding. And, his dad was a Marine and he just kind of equates it to, which is why we get along because I was in the Marines too. But, he
Yeah.
equates it to being deployed. He's like, well, he's going to deploy and be gone for hunting season and then be home. But yeah, it's not an easy lifestyle. It's an awesome lifestyle if you can do it. I'll be in
Yeah.
Fairbanks this summer. I don't know for how long, but I have a friend up there that owns a fishing outfit and a couple of years into it now. I met him when I was up there caribou hunting back in 23. And so
Nice.
I'm going to come up there and hang out with him this summer and learn the ropes of his operation, help guide some trips up there for him. And if I don't kill myself on a jet boat learning first, but,
Yeah, well,
but
we'll have to have you over at the house and, have to meet you in person then.
yeah, it'd be a blast. Absolutely. I'm hoping to spend at least a few weeks up there. If I could do it, ideally, I'd come up there, do some fishing, and then stay for opportunity to go caribou hunting again. So it'd be nice to be able to do that. But yeah, we'll see.
Sure.
But yeah, I was going to ask you. I know I'm pretty sure you've told that story about shooting the bear in the forehead on your podcast. Hey, everybody. I just want to take a quick break to thank you for listening to the Pursuing Freedom Outdoors podcast. And to thank you today, I want to offer you a discount at 360 Sportsman. Head over to 360sportsman.org now and use promo code PF15. That is PF15 to get 15% off your subscription to any of their master classes listed on the website. You can learn anything over there to improve your skills at hunting, fishing, trapping, snowmobiling. There's going to be first aid classes up there. They've got all kinds of stuff. There's even a how to build a house class coming. So anything you want to learn related to the outdoors or just making yourself a more knowledgeable human being, head over to 360sportsman.org. Use promo code PF to get 15% off any of their master classes. Want to thank you for listening to the Pursuing Freedom Outdoors podcast, and we'll get back to the show. But I couldn't remember two things. One, do you have the skull? And what's that? That's got to be pretty sweet. Did that
If you give me about 10 seconds, I'm going to grab it for you.
grab it? Yeah, let's see that thing.
Yeah. Hold on just a second here. Okay. Had to run in the other room here. Yeah, so this is the skull. I think we had it on our podcast as well. So this is where the broadhead went in. And my father-in-law, he has Dermestead beetles, I think they're called. And so he beetle cleans all of our skulls and then puts a little whitener on them and then puts a clear sealant. And so that the broadhead is a 3-blade G5 M3, and this is the exact one that I shot through the skull.
That's great.
You can see that the tip is just barely curled over at the very, very end there, which is typical of a 3-blade. But where it went in, the two little blade marks, there's one right there that you can see that line on the front kind of just sealed up. So you look at it and you think, how did that fit through there? But that's where it went. And then in the back, it came right out the brainstem. And you can see the two little skid marks on the bottom of the brainstem where it kind of rode the bottom of the skull on the way out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
wild.
that's how I have it sitting on a shelf, is with that broadhead just kind of sitting on the forehead for display.
Yeah, that makes a perfect display for it too. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of a unique situation. Definitely not something that I would recommend to anybody necessarily, but I had always been curious. I had always wondered if that would work. Yeah, I don't know. That bear was dead already. He just didn't know it yet. But there were a couple of factors that played into it. So the first thing is, number one, just that bear's behavior. Him being shot and then coming back over towards the stand with an aggressive attitude is factor number one. That's never happened to me before. The second part of it was I had already had problems at that bait the week prior with a bear that my wife had shot that had been coming up the tree pretty aggressively and kind of swatting at the stand and, being a typical curious black bear, but playing peekaboo around the tree with it with my 10mm pistol. And he eventually got down and went to the bait pile, and my wife shot him and killed him. But that platform stand at the time was only about 6 feet off the ground. And I knew that this bear was significantly bigger than the one that my wife had shot the week prior, and her bear was just a hair under 6 foot squared, I think. So this one ended up squaring, I think, either right at or just a hair under 7 foot, but it was right about that 7 foot squared mark, and definitely the biggest measuring black bear that I've ever killed, body wise. And I don't remember what the skull was. I think it was maybe high 18, something like that, but anything over 18 up here is great where we hunt. But yeah, so I had all that going through my mind, and these bears at this bait had been pretty competitive and pretty aggressive as compared to other black bears that I've dealt with in the past. And so I had all that running through my mind, plus the undeniable element of curiosity. And I already had my bow back. I already had my pin right kind of just kind of at the top of the shoulders. That bait from stand to bait pile is 9 yards, I think, 9 or 10. It's super tight. And he came halfway back to the stand after he'd been shot the first time. So he was only 4 yards, if that, from the stand. So it's not like the pin was trying to focus on a spot like this. It was the pin and here. There was a whole lot of real estate around where the pin was sitting. It was basically a point blank shot. So curiosity got the better of me, and I thought, you know what? If there's ever been a time to try this, it's now. And of course, that all happened in such a fast sequence. And my wife was filming it, thankfully, from her seat right next to me. And so I do have it on video. I don't think I've ever published that anywhere. I don't want people to think that I'm condoning it as a normal practice. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Yeah.
People that don't know any better, and then you end up shooting one and you skim it across the face, and all you do is just make it mad and educate it and name something that is unnecessary. I mean, the best killing shot on any bear in the world is a lung shot. That's the shot that anybody should be taking. But I don't know. I guess that just kind of makes me nervous that it would attract the wrong kind of attention.
Right. That's totally fair, man. But I really like the way you framed it up. And that was the first thing I thought when you were kind of talking about it was that was already a dead bear shot through the lungs with a broken leg.
Yeah. Yep.
And I mean, you're putting your years of experience together, knowledge of bears, and instinctually recognizing, okay, this isn't right. It's just like even
Yeah.
when I'm in law enforcement, right? I've been doing it long enough to where when I come up on a situation, my instincts will tell me a lot of times, like,
Yeah.
something's not right here,
Yeah.
and it causes you to react a little differently. Honestly, I would have been, even if at ground level, if I'm sitting there and you already had that arrow knocked, I mean, you're either going to let it go and draw your pistol, or you're going to,
Exactly.
or you're going to fling the arrow and draw your pistol. I think flinging the arrow and dropping your bow for your pistol is probably a really like your best plan anyway. So I don't
Hmm.
think, I think
Yeah.
that was a pretty slick move. And yeah, then you get the added benefit of the curiosity being,
Yep.
you get to figure out what was going to happen. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty wild story.
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty interesting. I had been talking about that with my brother-in-law, Mo, who runs the podcast with me here. And then his dad, my father-in-law, I married Mo's younger sister. She's the second of, I think, 6 kids in the family. So my father-in-law, and then his hunting partner, and Mo and I combined, we are well over 100 bears between the four of us. And my father-in-law and his buddy are both primarily have most of their kills over bait, and almost all of their bear kills are with a bow. And between the two of them, they had never shot one in the head either. And something had happened recently where the four of us were together at some event, and the topic got brought up. I think someone mentioned Tim Wells, which if you listen to my podcast, you've heard me tongue in cheek talk about Tim Wells's videos and how they do or don't help the perception of hunting by the public, but whatever. But I think my father-in-law actually brought up a Tim Wells YouTube video where he shot a grizzly bear in the head with a bow. And I don't know if it was completely intentional or not, to be honest with you. It was more of a spot and stalk situation. He kind of ambushed it and cut it off at a stalk, and he shot, and I think it was a bit windy. And I don't know. I haven't asked Tim myself, so I can't jump to the conclusion. But he hit it in the head, and it went down instantly, as any central nervous system shot will do. I'm sure you've learned all of that and much more in your police training and being on the SWAT and all of that, terminal performance. If you interrupt the CNS system, the lights go out, and normally they don't come back on. So I knew that it would kill it, but I was curious what it would take and what angle it would take. But certainly, I mean, it's not a big target. I mean, even just looking at this again as I'm talking about it, the front of this thing's forehead, that's 3 fingers wide. I mean, maybe 4. But if you impact, I mean, had I been a half an inch further over, I don't know that it would have killed it. You know,
Yeah.
Now, like I said, though, the bear was already dead, so that didn't matter. But if this was a first shot opportunity and that bear came over to the front of the stand and did that, I would have shot him in the top of the spine between the shoulders, angled back towards the lungs, aiming for a spine/lung shot long before I would ever take a first shot as, let's try for the forehead, because
Right.
there's heartbeat and there's pin wobble, and you never actually are 100% sure. Something could happen with your bow. There could be a mechanical problem, and you don't know. That arrow only has to be off a couple of inches either way, and it ain't going to work. So just circumstantially, it worked out great, and now all 4 of us are happily satisfied with the fact that if we have to make a follow-up shot in the forehead, it can work.
There you go.
Yeah,
There you go.
but yeah,
Well,
yeah, it's fun.
so speaking of just like brown bears and archery too, let's kind of dive into maybe let's start with since talking about black bears and just kind of wrap up black bears. Like, why don't you give us kind of the rundown on your process, your baiting process, and how you're picking bait sites, and then kind of how you run a bait site. What's your process for that? And then I was curious too. Are you guys taking? I can't remember if I've heard you on the podcast because I also listen to a lot of Tyler Friel's show, and
Yeah.
I know he kills a lot of brown bears over his baits. Are you guys also killing brown bears on your baits?
Not nearly as many as Tyler does. No. For the most part, I've actually only ever shot one interior grizzly bear for myself, and that was last June. I shot a 7-foot sow with my compound right at the end of the season. Mo was with me. My wife had killed a black bear a couple weeks prior, and as soon as she killed that black bear, the bait just it was like a switch went off, and it just instantly went to all grizzly bears. And they ran all the black bears off, which really irritated me because we wanted to get another bear for meat. And actually, that first bear that she shot last year was skin and bones. And the 30-second version of that is she had shot that bear the spring prior with her bow, and she had made a poor shot. The bear got away, lived, and then came back, and it was the first bear back on the bait this spring. And so when I got back from brown bear guiding in June, she and I went out to that bait, and that black bear walked in about 5 minutes after she and I sat down, and it was the same bear. There was a big old scar, leather patch on its shoulder. So she shot it, killed it. It died 10 yards from the bait, as they should. And as we were skinning it out, we found her broadhead just inside the scapula. It was wedged between the shoulder blade and the vertebrae on the back side of the shoulder blade. So it was just right there, and there was a whole bunch of just scar tissue and cartilage that had just kind of built up and calcified around the broadhead. But because of that, and that's unfortunate, but that it happens. It's hunting, and especially it's bow hunting. But as a result of that, there was almost no salvageable meat worth speaking of on that bear, so we didn't end up getting much off of it at all. So I wanted more black bear meat, and when the grizzly bears came in and decided to open up a circus tent at the bait, I told Mo, I said, well, you're going with me on the last weekend before we have to clean this thing out for the season, but it's been all grizzly bears. The black bears are a goner. So the first adult grizzly bear that walks in is going to get an arrow. So I ended up shooting a sow. She came in, it was her lucky day, and sun was shining, blue skies, and it was early in the afternoon, so that gave us plenty of time to clean up and do all of our work and get out of there. But yeah, so for the most part, we have tried to focus on black bear areas for our baits. Some of them we do have some bleed over, but in general, when we are setting up a bait, we're looking for a black bear spot. We're not
Yeah.
usually intentionally seeking out a spot that's going to have a lot of grizzly bears. Now, that being said, I'm going back to that spot where I shot that grizzly bear last year because there's one grizzly bear in there that has about an 8-inch wide front paw track in the mud, which is a bit exaggerated because it's in the mud. But I saw that bear in person once last spring, and he didn't give me a shot, and I wanted to shoot him bad. I could have shot him laying down, but he kept moving his arm back and then his back leg forward, so he was always moving too much. He had a sow with him, which, he was super on edge about, and they sat there for 20 minutes, and I got all kinds of good footage of him, and he just never gave me a good shot, and that's not the bear that I wanted to play around with experimenting. A grizzly bear like that, that's not a game. So anyway, I'm going back there just to try to see if more black bears will show back up. I think they will, but we're also going to put out another spot not too far from there and see if we can find where the black bears are, because there are some topographical reasons why we think certain places are better for black bears than grizzly bears. I think the number one thing is the grizzly bears love things that kick and scream and try to get away when they try to eat it, and that's moose calves. So that's just the natural thing, right? So always during calving season, the grizzly bears are going to go where the moose are, and definitely black bears kill a lot of moose calves too. But if you're in an area that has a heavy moose population, we have found that generally that results in more grizzly bears showing up than black bears. And sometimes they'll put up with one another at a bait, and other times at other baits, they will not tolerate one another. There'll be black bears there right up until the grizzly bears show up, and then it's over. It's like the mob moved into that block. They own it. And that's what happened at that bait last year. So, but yeah, as far as grizzly bears go, my father-in-law's buddy has killed one really big old one. My father-in-law has not shot one over bait. He's tried. My sister-in-law shot one off of my bait a couple of years ago. After I shot a black bear, I was too tired to go out the next day. She went out with my father-in-law and she shot one. It was, again, just another 7-foot sow. And Mo hasn't killed one over bait, and I've killed one. So single digits for us. But again, I think a lot of that is just the areas that we are. Tyler hunts in some different spots, and he's really good at killing grizzly bears over bait. I've learned a lot from Tyler growing up, and as soon as Tundra Talk came out, I was on it. As a young guy, I ate that up. Tyler's been a big help to us in a lot of ways. He's a good guy, good local source of information.
Yeah, he seems to do a really good job with the podcast. It's another one that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
And definitely happy to see that he is making a good recovery after his accident down here in the lower 48.
Yeah, he seems to be doing okay. He's sore, but I think he'll come back. We'll just call him the $6 million man now.
Right on. Well, yeah, so that makes a lot of sense, and it's the same thing in the lower 48 too. We have areas that there's just more grizz. I was talking to Joe Condelis about it. There's just more grizzly, like down where he lives in, I think he's, the Cody, Wyoming area, and it's just a habitat thing.
Yep.
You get up here into northwest Idaho or northern Idaho where I live, and everywhere around where I'm at immediately, it's going to be all black bears, but it doesn't take very long for us to get out into areas where you might chance encounter a grizzly, but then you go an hour and a half north and, we see grizzly bears up there all the time. And so, we definitely have areas where it's more grizz, more black bear, and then we have a couple spots where they're pretty well intermingled. A fellow that I guided for has told a story that I always like to kind of repeat. But the gist of it is that he had a client shoot a black bear and then had a grizzly jump out of the bushes and grab it and drag it off. And the client never recovered his bear. Yeah, they're actually kind of turning into a problem down here, but in our area.
Yeah, I've heard that.
North.
Yeah. I don't think people give grizzly bears enough credit. That they are so much smarter than black bears. They really are, and that they're a whole different animal. I mean, that goes without saying. Obviously, they are, but people think that a bear is a bear, and it's very much not. Grizzly bears, even just baiting, like they are way harder to fool at a bait. Way harder. Black bears will just come in. I mean, we have all kinds of terminology that we use for it, but like a fat man to a barbecue, man. A black bear will show up. He'll do one of these numbers, stick his nose in the air, and then just whoop, he's going to the bait pile. He's hardly ever going to do anything else unless it's really, really quiet, or he smells you above the bait, or you've been making racket, or you're moving around too much. If you're doing your part, they just go straight to the bait. I mean, they almost don't even care.
And at that point, once they get comfortable, we'll sit in the tree stand and have a conversation, just whisper tones, and they'll look up at you and crunching on dog food and vacuuming up marshmallows that you throw out of the tree at them. And the grizzly bears, man, it's a whole different ballpark. Like if you hear one coming in, which you will when they come in, most of the time they'll make their presence known. You'll hear them breathing. Sometimes a couple hundred yards away, you'll hear as they're walking in. And they're coming in, they'll get close and they'll look around, they'll test the air, they'll do a little circle around, they'll test the air some more, they'll blow and they'll break stuff to make sure that everything knows that they're coming in. And if they get even the wrong feeling about coming in, and they just won't, and they'll just leave. Black bears cannot overpower their sense of hunger. Grizzly bears, I guess they can walk away from a meal because they do it frequently. But you better have your bow in your hand, on your knee, release on the D-loop, and your camera guy better be done moving around for the time that thing comes into view. Because if he catches you, odds are, at least in our experiences, they're not going to hang around. They're not that dumb. But yeah, it's a whole different challenge, and it's a lot harder, and that really speaks to someone like Tyler's ability to pull that off again and again. Yeah, it's a whole different ballpark.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, just to hear the difference too. And I guess I didn't really think about the difference in intelligence and spookiness, or that they're skittish. I would have almost probably guessed, not having experience baiting grizzlies, that they'd be so big and tough and badass that they would have no issue just coming in and dealing with whatever's around.
Yeah.
Because the only difference I ever think of in black bears and grizzlies is just that grizzlies are absolutely terrifying, and black bears, I have a healthy respect for them, but they don't scare me when I walk into the woods. It's usually black bears aren't top on my list of things I'm worried about killing me. It's usually grizzly bears and moose. But
Yeah. It's well, that one that I told you that came in this last spring with the sow. We actually named several of those grizzly bears. That's just what happens, I guess. But that one, Fred and Ethel. Fred is the boar. If you ever watched I Love Lucy, then you understand the reference. If you don't, then, well, anyway, we'll move on from that. But he got spooked after he'd been laying down, like I said, for about 10, 15 minutes. I was ready. I had my bow sitting on my knee. Camera guy was with me. It wasn't Mo. It was a different friend of mine from church. He had never been to a bear bait before. And in that night, we saw 2 black bears and then those 2 grizzly bears. So now he's hooked. So we were sitting there waiting for a shot. And all of a sudden, nothing changed. The wind didn't swirl. We didn't make any noise. He kept looking up at us. He would eat, he'd take a bite, and then he'd look over like this. And then he would eat, and then he'd look over like this. So anytime I would have had a chance to draw and actually get my bow back and take a shot, he would always have his head turned and just watching me. You don't move. So eventually, he just stopped eating and stood up, kind of like a dog that knew they did something wrong. You know how your pet does that. You don't even have to say anything. You just give them a look. And they just get quiet and they do it slowly. And he turned around, looked at me, and then just slowly eked his way out behind the bait, went over and crossed. There's a large piece of water right there, a little swamp area. He crossed that, went up onto a high bank, and I could see him about 80 yards away, barely through the brush. And I watched him bust over about 4 different trees that had to have been about that big around. And just he would do that, and he would pace up and down the embankment because the sow stayed at the bait. But he knew he didn't like something. She hadn't picked up on it yet. He was trying to talk to her from across the swamp. And I mean, he was growling. It was honestly the first time that I had heard a grizzly bear do this in person. He had this real low, guttural growl. If you ever watched any African lion hunting videos, you've heard them, that low. It's like each gurgle is its own individual sound, and just that low rumbling growl. I'd never heard a grizzly bear do that, and it was pretty. I don't want to say intimidating because I had a rifle in the stand with me, but it was a nice show of force. I guess we can put it that way. And he would just walk up and down that mud bar and just pounding his front feet and looking over at us and standing up on his back legs. Eventually she left, and I could have shot her 100 times over. She was oblivious and didn't care for those few minutes that he was across the way. I was not about to shoot his girlfriend with one tag. My buddy didn't have, what was it? He hadn't brought his own gun. Well, he had a handgun. He didn't have a bow. I didn't want him to shoot it with a handgun. So anyway, just the situation was he wasn't going to shoot a bear because Mo had the next shot if I shot one. So he just came along to tag along. So I told him, I said, I'm not shooting this sow because if she runs over and dies over on this side of the swamp, he might come over here. And now if we have to shoot him, it's a defensive life and property because he didn't have the proper licensing and tag and the situation to shoot that bear. So anyway, just that situation, I didn't end up shooting that sow. But that behavior, if a black bear spooks, he's not going to go off and make a bunch of noise and pitch a fit about it. That's not how they act. They'll just disappear, and they'll come back after a while usually, and they'll come back around and reinvestigate. Maybe they'll come back in, but they certainly won't go off and pitch a temper tantrum and let you know that they're not happy. But grizzly bears will do that.
That's wild. Yeah, they're definitely, just speaks to the fact that grizzly bears, I mean, are kind of the most badass predator on the continent, I guess would be just the best way to put it. There's just not a lot that it's more intimidating than a grizzly bear. I'm actually reading a book right now about a fellow that was on a canoe trip in what part of Canada? It was up in like the northeast part of Canada, and gets mauled by a grizzly bear, and just finished the part where the mauling actually occurred. But yeah, it's just it's wild, man. They're a critter to respect for sure.
Yeah.
And I definitely want to hear too more about some of the guiding and the experiences you've had guiding grizzly bear hunts or brown bear hunts down there. But before we do, just real quick, circling back to just what's your process again for baiting? Where do you start? Hey, folks, just wanted to take a quick break from the show to talk about my most recent partnership with a good friend of mine, Jake Collier, and his company, One Outdoors. One Outdoors provides a trusted place to purchase outdoor experiences, gear, and services. They aim to positively impact people and the environment by donating 10% of all of their net profits to Restoration Outdoors, a nonprofit, which in turn invests in mental health and conservation. One Outdoors offers trips around the globe, whether you're interested in hunting in Africa or fishing in Alaska, Patagonia, and more. They can customize your outdoor experiences and beyond just hunting and fishing to whitewater rafting, you name it, folks. If you can dream it up in the outdoors, One Outdoors can help make that dream come true. And I'm proud to be partnering with them and consulting on trips and hunts. So if you're interested in booking a trip of a lifetime with One Outdoors, you can reach me or reach out to me at thomas@pursuingfreedomoutdoors.com. It's thomas@pursuingfreedomoutdoors.com, or you can contact me directly through Instagram, Facebook, you name it. But One Outdoors, folks, really excited to be working with these guys. So thank you very much for listening to the Pursuing Freedom Outdoors podcast, and we'll get back to the show.
Yeah. Well, there's always a social hierarchy, even within bear populations. For example, if you and I were to go into, let's just say New York City, and we wanted to have dinner at the most exclusive club restaurant in the city, we wouldn't be able to get in because that's reserved for the billionaires that own the club probably, or that have memberships, or the finance wizards that have all those high dollar memberships. That's the elite hangout spots. Bears are the same way. You don't just get to go to the best spot just because you walk there. So I have baited in areas that have bears, and then I've baited in areas that have big bears. And that a bear is looking for, our baiting season is from April 15th till the end of June up here in the area that I live. There's some other baiting that can be done in the southern part of the state I think it's in August and September. There's a little bit of fall baiting, but as a rule of thumb, bear baiting in the interior is April 15th, tax day, which is the only good thing about tax day, through the end of June. And usually where we are around the Fairbanks area, and then anywhere a few hours north, south, east, or west of us, the snowpack is usually going to be gone by the second week of May. So most guys, ourselves included, don't usually put out baits until the middle of May, which reduces our season length down to about a month. But the middle of June, about the middle 2 weeks of June is when we see all the rut activity happening. That's when the guys are chasing the girls around, and that acts as a good attractant. The best bear bait is a hot sow in the rut, but you have to get them there to begin with, and it's always nice if you can start off with mature boars there anyway. And mature bears are looking for food, water, and shade, and somewhere secluded. And they're out of the den for a decent amount of time by the middle of May, and so they've already blown that digestive plug. They've probably already found some berries from last fall that was scrounged up out of the tundra. They've already found some green grass or some shrubs and roots to eat up, and so their system is moving, and they're headed for an area where they can find more food. And waterways are obviously, that goes without saying, that is a food-rich environment just in and of itself. And so rivers, creeks, swamps, even swamps, especially with big patches of willows, because that's where moose are going to be. And like we said earlier, bears kill a lot of moose calves. Actually, a tremendous number of moose calves a year get killed by grizzly and black bears in the interior. So if you can find an area with shade, with some really thick, tight brush, occasionally, some trees around. Black bears, I've noticed, I tend to do better baiting black bears when there are some slightly bigger trees around. I think that's because they retreat up trees. That's just my theory on it. I've seen that happen very, very seldomly. A couple of times I've been at a bait and I've had an immature black bear at the bait, and a bigger black bear or a grizzly bear shows up, and the smaller one goes up a tree. I've seen that happen maybe a half a dozen times in 10 years. So I would have to assume, and this is again just one person's sample size, doesn't happen that often, but they like to have it as their safety. But that seems to be a black bear thing. If I'm looking for a black bear bait, I want some bigger trees around, but it doesn't have to be a lot. And I also like to see a lot of thick brush. I don't want to be able to see my bait from 50 yards away. That's just me, but a lot of guys I know that are successful feel the same way. I want to walk into a tight area. And that makes it, you need to be on your toes, because at some point you'll walk in on a sleeping bear on the bait pile in the middle of the afternoon. And so you need to be ready for whatever their reaction is. I haven't had one go the wrong direction yet, but usually they just take off and run away. But that tight area makes them feel safe. They don't like a big open area for the most part. And I say that's, again, our experience, although I've seen plenty of other pictures and videos of guys that their bait sites are wide open. Sometimes they're even at the edge of a field. I've not had any luck at places like that, and I have tried, and I have not had any luck at all. So I stick to what I've known, and that is tight areas with a lot of cover. They can come in quietly, and this is black bears. They can show up quietly and leave quietly, and you won't know that they're there until they're about 10 yards away from the bait. So you got to be awake. And I've woken up to black bears on the bait that weren't there when I dozed off. So just having a lot of cover, having a source of water nearby, because you want that bait site to become a home for them for the baiting season. And so if they have water and shade close by, that water is a cool area to bed during the hot time of the day. You think about it, it's an animal wearing a fur coat. It's not like a caribou where they'll shed a lot of their winter hair and get kind of mangy looking in the summertime. Bears aren't like that. Some of them will rub, but a bigger bear doesn't seem to lose as much hair. I don't know what it is about that, but we have never killed an actual big bear that's had big rub spots or poor hair in general. Minor rubs, sure, like underneath the armpits and stuff like that, but they don't have big sections of back hair missing off of them. So it seems to me like that tells me that if a big bear has good hair, he's not spending a lot of time out in the heat of the day where he feels like he's got to rub all that hair off. Because you see a lot of the smaller bears doing that. So that tells me he's sleeping by a cool area. And I've also shot a good number of bears that have mud on them when I shoot them. And so that tells me they're bedding down in the mud by the creek. It's a cool, shaded area, and they feel safe. They're in their little spot. And oftentimes, if you'll go walking up and down those creeks where they'll bed, if you set up a bait in that area, or even if you're just scouting, you'll find bear beds kind of dug into the side of a muddy creek bank, where they just like to just dig their little semicircle hole, and they'll dig it with a vantage point, usually, where they're not stupid, but they'll give themselves an ability to just kind of lay there and look around. They can just open their eyes and look around and then go back to sleep. But they're cool, they're in the shade. So that's the kind of areas that I like to target for bears in general. When it comes to targeting grizzly bears necessarily, I think that's a lot more centered around moose populations. Grizzly bears tend to be really nomadic by nature. Usually at most of the baits that we've ever had, and we've had a lot of different sites that we've tinkered with over the last 10 years of kind of our little group doing it together. And that's my brother-in-law, myself, one other buddy of mine, and my father-in-law. That the four of us kind of make up my little sample size group, if you will. And so in the last 10 years, for the most part, grizzly bears, they come in and they leave. They don't give you a lot of time. And by that, I mean, sometimes they only hit the bait one time, then they're gone. And you don't see them for the rest of the season. They make an appearance, you see them on the camera, and if you missed it, that's it. If you weren't there, then you won't see it. They don't come back. And I think that's just because they're on the way to somewhere to go do something else. You know, they spend their summers somewhere else, and they just happen to be led by their nose to your bait on the way. They make a pit stop, gorge themselves on as much dog food as they can pack into their gut, and they leave. But the spots that I've had grizzly bears stay, which is only 2 places in 10 years of trying this, and both of those places are very, very dense moose populations, and the surrounding area is a lot of willows. There's not a whole ton of big evergreen trees or even birch trees. There's small pockets of timber, but I mean pockets as in like 20 square yards, and that's it. So you get up in a spruce tree and you can look over the top of the willow prison that you have to wade through to get there. And I mean, these willows are like 12, 14 feet tall, but it also has burned in the last decade. Most of the time, that's a lot of where the moose tend to go because there's all that nice green willow browse. So the moose will not only winter there, but now there's water. There's a creek nearby if you're picking that kind of spot. So the moose will also calve there because they have good feed around them. So the grizzly bears know that for sure. So the spots that we've had the highest concentration of grizzly bears, they don't actually leave. They do for a little bit, then they come right back. I mean, they'll be missing for a couple of days, then they're right back on the bait. So they're hanging out in that area. They're not leaving and leaving that zip code. And if you do any kind of research about grizzly bear collaring studies that have been done up here, they'll walk hundreds of miles if they want to. They are not intimidated by travel. There's an outfitter friend of mine that I know. He's been an outfitter for many, many years in the south central part of the state, and he had a client that ended up shooting a grizzly bear that was collared. It was an old boar. I think it was upper teens, and he didn't even realize that it had a collar until they shot it. So he brought the collar into the Fish and Game office in that part of the state. He asked the guy, he said, "Can you track this and tell me where this bear came from?" And he described it as that bear was born, well, I'm sorry, not born, was collared right in that area, within about a 10-mile area of where they shot that bear in late September on a moose hunt. So that client was moose hunting, shot that grizzly bear. That bear had been collared on that river system about 10 miles from there. And through just that calendar year, from the time that he had woken up from hibernation, he had traveled over a 300-mile loop, crossed major rivers, spent the entire summer, I mean, way out. I mean, just about up to my area of the state on the south side of our river that they had tracked him to, and all the way back down to that mountain range. And just for no apparent reason, he just went on a walkabout. And that bear, they said, was easily, I think it was 16 or 17 years old, but it was a crazy
Wow.
old bear. But yeah, so grizzly bears are just nomadic. There's really not a predicting factor. And in our areas, if you find a spot that looks really moosey, at least in our experience, that's led to more grizzly bears. So I'm sure there's no absolutes in this thesis, if we could call it that, but
Right.
it's just what we've seen. And so judging off of what we've had happen, we try to make decisions and pick places judging off of prior experiences. And most of the time it seems to hold true, but that burn aspect, I think, has a lot of validity to it. Anytime we've been baiting in a burn that's happened within the last 10 years seems to be a really heavy grizzly bear spot.
I mean, that makes total sense. We see that down here all the time. And,
Do
when
you?
an area gets burned out, within a few years, it produces really good feed. And
Right.
next thing you know, it's loaded with elk in the spring. And so
Yeah.
whether it's grizzly bears or black bears, a good burn area with a lot of feed and elk in the area, I mean, that's going to be a great place to go do your spring bear hunting during calving.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say that's something that even if you're not looking to target one kind of bear or the other, if you're just a new guy starting out, that's a tip that I would give. Try to find an old burn area and go do some looking around, find a body of water that runs through it, look for some vegetation and look for the feed and go walk a 2-3 mile loop if you want to do that kind of thing, or just put out a test bait, register a spot and put out a camera and some scent lures and maybe a 5-gallon bucket of bait. But don't overdo it in case you got to clean it up and it's a dud. But just try it, and that's how we found all of our best spots is just test baits. We'll register it, go out, put out a 5-gallon bucket worth of bait, some really strong, powerful scent lures and sprays, and hang a dead beaver from a game bag high up in a tree and put a game camera on it. Oftentimes, we won't even set up a stand until we know that there's good bears there, and then we'll come back within the week and check it out. And if it's a dud, then it's a dud. But that'll often give you a good impression of what's in the area.
That's a hot tip, man. I was telling you before we started recording that one of my biggest turnoffs to bear baiting is, as much as I do love it, I like it for a lot of the things that you talked about, getting to watch bears, getting to watch wildlife in general. I've had moose, elk, deer,
Yeah.
and all kinds of things come through a bear bait when I'm sitting in the stand. It's fun. But what got me off of the last few years is I went, hiking and shot a bear spot and stalk in an area where we're not allowed to bait, because we're actually not allowed to bait in some areas with heavy grizzly populations. Since we can't shoot grizz down here, they just try to avoid the unnecessary conflict, I guess, is what they're worried about, or if that habituating the bears, I don't know. But they don't let us bait in our heavier grizz areas. But around here I've baited, but it's the work, man. Like, the work of bear baiting is a lot, and if I don't have the time to put into it, a lot of times I won't even bother, just because checking baits, filling baits, checking cameras. And this is where what you just said comes into play, because a lot of times I'm like, dude, I don't want to go set up try a new spot just for it to be a dud. I don't know why, because it's such common freaking sense to just be like, well, let's grab one of our bait tags and go try some different spots until we hit a hot spot. I don't know why I've never thought of doing that, man. That is such a no-brainer that you say that, and I'm like, dude, what years of wasted effort. But yeah, I'm going to bring that up with my hunting buddy, and it's like, dude, I just got a hot tip on how we can maximize our bear scouting this spring.
Yeah.
That's funny, man.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah. So
I think the best bear bait is, as far as a hot sow, I mean, outside of that, but I mean, a dead rotten beaver carcass in an old canvas game bag, just hoist that up in a tree. And I don't know if you ever heard of the company Batum 907. It's a local Alaska company that makes attractants and lures. I've used her stuff for years. She's been a big supporter of ours, and her sow in heat gel is really, really good. So if you're baiting around that rut time, that's really good. But don't overdo it. You can actually overpower it. So just a little bit on the end of a stick, and put that underneath of a tree branch so that it doesn't wash off too much. But I've also noticed that the stinkier the bait, as far as the more rotten, rank stuff, the more that seems to attract the grizzly bears. Which is why I think the last couple of years at that particular bait that I was talking about, after we killed a black bear and there was a carcass and gut pile there, the grizzly bears showed up. So that seems to hold true to that spot as well. But if you have something that's not quite as rank and rotten smelling, usually the black bears will be a little more attracted to it.
Yeah, gotcha. It's funny, speaking of bear bait, what you're using to bait with, donuts have always been a go-to for us.
Yeah.
And, which is funny because of my job, right? So for a while,
exactly.
a buddy and I were baiting together. We were running a bait, and we finally had a bear come in, and we were like, oh man, we need to get some more bait, because he's emptying it pretty fast and getting a couple different bears coming through. So in the town that I was working in, I work for down here, a county, which is up there, it'd be like a borough, right? But you guys don't have sheriff's departments. You have the troopers that cover the boroughs, but here we have sheriff's offices and sheriff's departments that cover our county. But we have contract cities, cities that pay the sheriff's office, provide police services. And so one of our contract cities assigned to, there was a donut shop that real friendly to law enforcement, for whatever reason. Donut shops and cops, man. But I've always been a stickler about, I won't eat a donut, buy a donut, in public in uniform. Like, I don't know why, I just wouldn't do it. I've had a partner one time that we were riding double, and it was National Donut Day, and he wanted to go get donuts for heat to take home to his wife. I'm like, dude, I'm not pulling up to the donut shop in our patrol car. And I actually pulled around a block behind the shop and made him walk his ass to go get the donuts because I didn't want to be seen near the donut shop. But anyway, so this donut shop in the town I was working in at the time, they would hook it up, man. They would give us all the leftover donuts at the end of the day and just take big garbage bags. And so I was desperate to get it that day because I was off the next day and wanted to go fill the bait. So I like waited till it got dark in the evening and pulled around to the back of the donut shop and knocked on the back door like it was a drug deal. Had these guys put 2 big giant contractor bags full of donuts in the back of my patrol car so that I could bring them home. And that was pretty funny, man, especially because for like a week, my car smelled like donuts, which was just way too ironically comical. But
yeah. The dangerous part about using donuts and pastries and bread products in general is that unless you let them go bad in time, brother, it's pretty tough to resist the urge to snack on a couple when you're putting out the bear bait.
right. Yeah.
There used to be a shop in town that I would snatch some bagel leftovers and some breads and like sweet breads and cinnamon breads and stuff like that. And I had that kind of a gig for a little while, and it was good while it lasted. But man, it was heavy to carry that stuff out there because most of the time I'm not using any motorized transport to get into most of the places where I hunt, and so I'm carrying it all in on my back on a pack frame. And but when I was using that bagel shop for my supplies, it was fat times at the bear bait, not just for the bears.
Yeah. That's another thing with the bear baits, man, is like, especially around here, if you're hunting close to town, I mean, if it's a place you could drive to, somebody drives to it. So packing in bait is definitely a thing. And then packing in the barrels too is a thing that we've always had to strategically place our baits according to that.
Yeah. Yeah, if I can ride there, then somebody else can ride there. I'm willing to walk some places that I know, and I know most people don't want to walk. So that's
There you go.
separates from competition pretty quick. But that there are some tough cookies out there in the zip code that I hunt in, and they do the same thing. But we all kind of know where we are, and we give each other some space. It ain't whitetail hunting, if there's somebody that I find that's set up on any given spring that's within a 2-mile area of my existing bait, then I will do my best to search them out while they're at their pickup still, or while they're at the trailhead, and I'll make contact. And I have no interest in getting into a big row out in the woods, but I'll just let them know, hey, this is where I'm at. I'm not far from you. I think that what we're doing here is hurting each other. You having a bait this close to mine is not helping you. It's going to hurt you, because all we're going to do is any bear that comes in here while I'm not here and you are is going to go to my bait, and vice versa. So please don't educate the bears. Go 2 or 3 more miles further away and man, knock yourself out. But give me like a 5-mile radius, and for the most part, that seems to keep the black bear competition away, and that goes back to like what I said earlier. Once bears find a spot, they're pretty close to home for the majority of the season. So I haven't found that many black bears will make a long route like that to go to another bait. But if you're within a mile, they will, 100%. If you're within a couple of miles, they probably still will. But 4 or 5 miles is the recommended distance for me.
Yeah. Well, good deal. Yeah. Well, that's important to know too. And up here or down here from you guys, these talking to people that live south of me, not north of me.
Yeah,
but
me too.
Down here in Idaho, we at least in some of these areas, it can get pretty busy. And then you also have to compete with the hound hunters too, who also have baits, but they'll have baits out every mile and cameras on them. And so it's interesting. And that's kind of when I went up and started to, did a little guiding for bear and got into that a little bit, and then realized I'm like, oh man, I can come up here and, if you time it right, spot and stalk a bear. So I ended up doing that the last few years, but I'm sure I'll run baits again. It's not like I'm anti-bait. I still like it. It kind of depends on what I got going on in the spring as to if I have time to do it. Well, even when I have spot and stock trips planned, I'll usually still run a bait with a buddy just so there's fallback options.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, but man, spot and stalk is a lot of fun too. It's
Yep.
nice to have the variety. I mean, realistically, the only reason that I'm as into bear baiting as I am is that this part of the state is so thick. Fairbanks is located, if you look up Fairbanks, it's located in what we call the Middle Tananaw Valley. And that the Tananaw River is a pretty large, well, very large for the interior size river. And we're kind of about 400 feet above sea level, I think. So we're pretty low, pretty flat all around here. There's some rolling hills, but not a lot of variabilities in terrain around here. You have to drive a decent distance in any direction to find some actual mountains, if you will. And if I lived in like the Palmer, Wasilla, Anchorage part of the state, I almost certainly would not bear bait. Almost certainly would not. And like I said earlier, that the buddy of mine that I guide with, that he and I started guiding at the same time, I've hunted with him down in his part of the state in the spring and fall out in the mountains, and it's a riot. I mean, it's an absolute riot. You wheeler in somewhere miles and miles and miles, and then you stop, and then you get out and you walk on foot and you climb the mountains, and you're hunting them up in the avalanche chutes and up on the berry fields. And that, to me, aesthetically, is much more pleasing than sitting over a bait pile where you can only see right around you. I don't have a great view of my bear bait. The sun comes up, and then the sun kind of stays at this angle and just kind of rotates around the sky. There's no mountains. There's nothing to look at. It's all very flat, very swampy, very low. But mountain bear hunting is a blast, but it's just not feasible for most people around on the Fairbanks interior area. So it's just the most effective way. But spot and stalk hunting, for guiding is all that I've ever done as far as guiding goes. I've never guided any bait hunts. It's not that I wouldn't. I've had some opportunities to, but it's just something that I like doing for myself and for my family and my friends. So I think I'm just going to keep it that way, honestly.
Yeah, well, you guys got a good thing going with it. And that's, a lot of guys, the reason we bait up here too is similar reasons. We have the mountains, but they're covered in trees you can't see. So you can sit on one mountain,
right?
And if you can glass to the other, a lot of times you can't see. So it's kind of,
right.
You either have to get up where the trees are a little sparse, hunt clear cuts where they've been logging roads, or you head south to country that's a little more open and do your spot and stalk down there. But all right, everybody, we went a little bit long on this episode, which is perfectly okay because Dalton's an awesome dude and I've really enjoyed our conversation. So we covered in this episode a lot about bear baiting, especially regarding black bears and how Dalton got a start. So next week, we're going to dive into brown bear hunting and all of Dalton's adventures guiding for brown bears in Alaska. So if you enjoyed this week's episode and listening to what Dalton had to say, you're really going to love next week. It's going to be a good time, folks. So join us next week here on the Pursuing Freedom Outdoors for part 2 of hunting bears in Alaska and our continuation of our spring bear hunting month here on the Pursuing Freedom Outdoors podcast. And if you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, follow, and do all the things that us podcasters tend to ask you to do. Because, folks, it really does help me out. Have a great week, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks again. And if this resonates with you, I want to welcome you to the tribe and encourage you to share this podcast with your friends. Hit subscribe and follow us on Instagram at Pursuing Freedom Outdoors. And if you or someone you know has a great story about life or the wilderness, I want to share it. You can shoot me a message on Instagram or email me with all inquiries and questions at thomas@pursuingfreedomoutdoors.com. That's Thomas, THOMAS, at pursuingfreedomoutdoors.com. Until next time, get out there, get after it, and pursue freedom in the outdoors.